I appreciate everyone being here today and spending your Friday here with me. Today, I will be discussing executive functioning and the connection to language and shifting more focus towards resiliency and decreasing that prompt dependence. As an introduction, my name is Michael McLeod. I am a certified speech and language pathologist. I specialize in ADHD and executive functions. And I am the owner of Grow Now Therapy Services based out of Media, and we serve families nationwide. Okay, so just to begin, and we'll do Q&A at the end. I'll be able to gather everyone's information. You guys can make sure you're muted. You can turn off your videos if you'd like, whatever works best for you guys. And we'll do questions at the end, and hopefully we can get to them all. It's a lot of information. I'll try to keep it within the hour. Might have to speed up at the end a little bit, but we'll make it fun. We'll make it interesting for a Friday. Okay. So in terms of executive functioning, we did the research study on the Grow Now model at the Stratford Friends School in Newtown Square during a portion of the 18-19 school year. We're looking to get that completely finalized and published in some medical journals. So that was a fantastic positive study on our specific Grow Now specific model on executive functioning. And at the bottom here, I like to put some of my favorite resources. I like to give a nice shout out to my sources in the beginning of the presentation as opposed to the end. So definitely check out these people. Sarah Ward is unbelievable with the work she's done in executive functioning. She's also a fellow speech pathologist who specializes in EF. You can find her at efpractice.com. A lot of the work she's done has really what I refer to as the gold standard of executive function treatment. Some of the stuff she's put out there I use on a daily basis. She's incredible. She always does tons of webinars, so always look out for her. Dr. Russell Barkley, so many of his lectures are free on YouTube, so you'll be able to check that out. He's incredible. You'll see a ton of his stuff in today's presentation. Peg Dawson, who I've had the pleasure of working very closely with, the author of Smart and Scattered. Ryan Wexelblatt, the ADHD dude. He has a fantastic Facebook page, YouTube page, Instagram page. He does some incredible webinars. Absolutely check him out. He's doing some fantastic work in terms of sharing information, most up-to-date information, and educating families. And I absolutely love the research done by the Harvard Center of the Developing Child. You'll see a lot of them today. They do some of the most groundbreaking research in executive functioning. Absolutely check them out. And also check out your local CHAD groups. We have some fantastic ones here in Philadelphia, Mainline, Chester County, all over. They're nationwide. So check out your local CHAD groups and find out how you can get involved. Okay, so we have here the first model, the first national survey that asked parents about ADHD was completed all the way back in 1997. And this is when so much of ADHD was still misunderstood and not fully understood. But since that time, there has been an upward trend in national estimates of parent-reported ADHD. And you can see that it's been quite a dramatic increase from 1997, and this one goes up until 2014, and it's even skyrocketed up since then. So this has become a growing issue. There is a massive need for more studies. Okay, so in recent years, there has been another major shift in our understanding of ADHD. So what has happened over the most recent couple of years is we have ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and then ADD, the attention deficit, which is the focus on hyperactivity or inattentiveness. But in the recent years, neuropsychologists have really found the connection between ADHD and executive functioning or executive dysfunction, the brain's cognitive management of functions. So now, because of all of the brain scan and MRI studies that have been done, we now are able to see the subtle and different brain differences within the ADHD brain and what's happening within that frontal lobe, which is the hub of executive functioning. Okay, so we now know that ADHD is something that we can refer to as a developmental delay. And this all takes place within that frontal lobe, that prefrontal cortex of the brain. In that prefrontal cortex of an ADHD brain, we see 3 to 10% reduced volumes in 5 different regions. And same pairs of the brain impacted by ADHD are the same areas that deal with emotions, self-awareness, and self-regulation. So now we're talking about so much more than just basic inattentiveness or hyperactivity. We now know that within the ADHD brain, there are areas affected that are dealing with emotions. For years and years, emotions were never tied to ADHD. It was just basic hyperactivity or hyperkinetic syndrome, as it was previously referred to. But due to these amazing brain studies, we now know that it is emotions, self-awareness, and self-regulation that are affected. And also, what's crucial is that the brain does not release and reload 2 specific neurotransmitters, dopamine and norepinephrine, at typical rates. And these are those pleasure chemicals, those feel-good chemicals. And we'll get into that a little bit later, and that tends to be why so many of these ADHD kids isolate into video games to get more of that consistent and constant drip of dopamine. So what we now see from these brain studies of the prefrontal cortex is there are many neuropsychologists and pediatricians that really are beginning to refer to ADHD as a self-regulation deficit disorder. Aside from just basic hyperactivity or inattentiveness, this is a disorder of self-regulation. And we know this because the limbic system, the amygdala area of the brain, is smaller in ADHD. And the anterior cingulate, which is the part of the brain that helps us make social and emotional decisions, has much less activation in ADHD, which leads to some impulsiveness. So us being able to do these MRI studies, these brain scan studies, have really helped us completely change our view on what ADHD is, its absolute connection to executive functioning, and to language, as we'll talk about today. Okay, so executive functioning is the higher level of what we're talking about today. Overall executive functioning, what is it? We'll get into it. We'll break it down into a more simpler term known as self-regulation. And we're going to talk about the language connection. So all 3 of these things are completely intertwined. Executive function skills, independent skills, the ability to self-regulate, and language. How is language involved in self-regulation and executive functioning? Okay, so number 1, I said in the beginning today that I am a speech language pathologist specializing in ADHD. How does that make any sense? So one of the most common questions, of course, I always get is, you're a speech therapist. Don't you just help people talk? Isn't that your job, to help people talk? Don't you work on lisps and R's and things like that? So the correct terminology that you may always see, and I know there's some SLPs, some wonderful SLPs in the meeting today, and I'm very happy you're joining us. You may see this acronym SLP, which stands for Speech and Language Pathologist. So we specialize in both speech and language. So those are 2 interconnected, but very, very different things. So speech, for example, really focuses on overall intelligibility. How can you be understood? Is there a lisp? Is there a phonological process? Is there apraxia of speech? Is there dysarthria? Is there a stutter? Is there cluttering? What can we do to make speech more intelligible? How can we work on the speech aspect and intelligibility? But then language is huge. We have expressive language, the way we express ourselves, how many words per sentence, how vast is our vocabulary, and so forth. We have receptive language, the ability to receive language. Can we answer WH questions? Who, what, when, where, why? Can we respond appropriately to back and forth conversations? There's social pragmatic language, the ability to have those back and forth conversations, the ability to act appropriately in social conversations. There's written language, reading language, and then for ADHD, there is internal or privatized language, which we will be talking about today. And this is a core foundation of ADHD and executive functions. And hopefully my goal for this presentation today is at the end of this presentation, you will understand why a speech and language pathologist can be the treating clinician for ADHD as we learn more about internal language. Okay, so we know that ADHD is this developmental delay in that frontal lobe, and it's the source of self-regulation. This is where self-regulation comes from, but it's also the source of self-motivation, okay? So what's important to know, number one, is human beings are the only species on this planet that can sustain a behavior over and over and over again in the absence of a consequence. So we are able to continually work at something that has distant and delayed gratification. And this is because, and this is important to realize, and this will be an ongoing theme throughout the presentation, that humans have the ability to pause. We have the ability to inhibit and not go for immediate gratification. And this is crucial for all executive functioning. Because in this pause, humans have the ability to stop, think, visualize, and use their internal language to aim their behavior towards the future. So there may not be an immediate consequence. If I do this, then this will immediately happen. The consequence could be months or weeks or years down the road, but we can still sustain that behavior because we have that ability to stop and call on our working memory, which we'll get into. So what we're doing there is we are creating and sustaining motivation because human beings have no problem with the delay because we can delay our gratification. And this is what leads to resiliency, constant work without immediate gratification. Okay? So what we now know is there has been years and years of focus of ADHD on hyperactivity, kids that are hyper, kids that can't sit still, kids that are inattentive, they can't focus, they're disorganized. But what we now know is there is a true connection between ADHD and executive functions. So instead of ADHD just being inattentiveness and hyperactivity, we now know that ADHD is a disorder of self-regulation, the inability to always self-regulate, self-evaluate, the higher level metacognitive self-evaluative skills, self-motivate, the ability to self-motivate towards that distance, that distant prize, that distant goal they're working towards. And it all comes down to internal language or self-talk. So these are the four main basic ways to describe what ADHD truly is. Okay? And no matter who you're talking to, you're going to get a different definition of what executive function skills are. Okay? And my favorite definition is Dr. Russell Barkley's definition. And he describes all executive function skills as a behavior directed to the self. Okay? And we're going to get into this about how things go from focus on others, focus on our world, to internal and privatized. So this is an ongoing theme to keep in mind throughout the presentation. So executive function skills are, what are you doing to yourself? What are the actions you're doing to yourself, for yourself, designed to change yourself, designed to improve oneself, so that your self's future, your distant future, your soon future, and how can these things be improved? What are the actions that you take to yourself designed to change yourself, to change and improve one's future, such as cleaning one's room, getting homework done, preparing for college, preparing for the SATs, getting off the video game so you can partake in varied activities. How are we able to do an action to the self to improve oneself? How can one person stop responding to the world around them and focus on themselves? And we're going to get into about how that all comes down to language. Okay? So executive dysfunction and language. So let's think about this. When we have an individual that has a delay in executive functioning, they may have that, they may have an ADHD label. We can certainly get into this, but what are the most common things that we see here? depending on, it's not that important if they have a diagnosis or not. If you're seeing a delay, if you're concerned about your child or one of your students, let's think about what we're constantly seeing here. So with executive dysfunction, one of the most common things we always see is anxiety. And how is that closely tied to executive dysfunction? And we are going to get into that in terms of the inability to connect our nonverbal and verbal. Our internal language system doesn't allow us to self-soothe and self-regulate and use information from the past, applying it to the present, and to build our future thinking skills. So we're able to build our situational awareness and the ability to read the room and self-regulate. And a lot of individuals with executive dysfunction tend to have a negative self-image because of these constant failures. They're so hard on themselves, and they get so much negative feedback from parents and teachers and peers. A lot of inappropriate behaviors because they're not learning from past experience. There's no cause and effect thinking. Difficulty with all non-preferred tasks. This is something that all of the parents here today can certainly understand. Difficulty with homework, difficulty with everything besides a video game. Low frustration tolerance. They're so impulsive. They're so quick to yell. They're so quick to get upset. How can we help them to enhance to not be so impulsive and enhance their emotional management? And one of the most common things we see with ADHD and executive dysfunction are these language learning difficulties. So many of these students received speech and language therapy during early intervention, 3 to 5 or 0 to 3 years. And many of them continue to have, whether it be an articulation issue, literacy, reading comprehension. Writing is huge because writing is a major toll on executive functioning in the prefrontal cortex. It's very concurrent, are these language issues. It's very hard for them to read a non-preferred book or to write an essay. It takes them forever to do it, or they'll do whatever they can to avoid. And we also see commonly poor social skills. And this comes from the inability to have full perspective taking skills, the ability to read a room and use your internal language to think about others' thinking. So there is a major, and this is just externally, this is what we're seeing as parents and clinicians. We see anxiety, negative self-image, behaviors, language learning difficulties, and this all stems from these executive dysfunctions. This is the basics of the executive function language connection. Okay, so now we're really getting into the really fascinating stuff here. So this is something that I really, really want you guys to take away from this presentation. This is the stuff that I just absolutely love. I find this completely fascinating. So this is the Dr. Russell Barkley connection of language to executive functions that he took from the psychologist of Lev Vygotsky. And Mr. Vygotsky, Dr. Vygotsky, he created this model of language development during the first few years. And Dr. Russell Barkley found the connection between language development and executive function development. And this is just absolutely fascinating stuff. And hopefully by the end of this, you can understand the connection and really be able to recognize it in your child. So what Vygotsky first recognized from his work is that in the beginning years of language development, language goes from public to private. But in the beginning years, it's very egocentric language. So kids everything revolves around them and they're describing their world. So between 0 to 3, when kids are first acquiring language, the beginning years of language acquisition, kids just emit language to others. It's all expressive language. There is no self-talk and there is no voice inside of their head. Everything is just language emitted to others, okay? And then between the ages of 3 to 5, we start to see kids talk to themselves, but it's all out loud. It's all expressive. There is still no voice inside their head. There's still no internal privatized speech. It's public. For example, if you put 2 4-year-olds in a room together about to go to bed, you'll hear them talking, but it's just out loud self-speech. You'll hear constant them talking to themselves and directing themselves, but it's all out loud. You can hear all of it. It's quite adorable. It's quite an adorable thing. You can record it and listen to it, and it's amazing that you are able to hear this this external self-talk. It's really an amazing progress of acquisition here. And then once the child hits 5 years old, between 5 and 7, this is where it starts to happen. This is the fascinating part. Between 5 and 7, we start to notice the face and the larynx start to become suppressed. And it's during these times when language will begin to go from public to private. For instance, you'll see like a 5, 6, or 7-year-old walk around and do this. You see the lips moving, but you cannot hear the speech. They are starting to gain the skill of internal language. It's really fascinating. And then between the ages of 9 to 12, this is when it really starts to get cemented, and children gain that full use of internal, private, self-talk language. Okay? So what we learned here is that language, during these first few years of language development, language goes from public, kids being focused with their world around them, to private. And language will go from description in the early years, where kids just describe their world and they're focused on the externals, and then they begin to self-instruct, and it starts to go within. Everything goes from public to private. So below 5 years of age, and this is the fascinating part, and this is when language and executive functions truly start to become connected. Below 5 years, language has not yet gained control over the motor system of the brain. You can see a 5-year-old playing a game, or a 4-year-old playing a game, and he could be saying, stop, 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 I have to stop, I have to stop. And it will not work, because language has not yet gained control over the motor system. Language, internal language, external language, has not yet been able to control the motor strip of the brain, okay? But once the period of 5 to 7 comes, that is when internal language gains control over the motor area of the brain. So what you say to yourself starts to control what you do. You may see a big jug of ice cream and you can say to yourself, I don't need to eat that right now, I could wait. And you're able to stop, you're able to control yourself. You're able to talk to yourself and decide if you want to stay inside or go outside and ride your bike. You're able to use your language to control your day and control your behavior. So that period of 5 to 7, when language gains control over the motor strip, this is the foundation of language and executive functions. Okay, so language controls self-regulation, because what we say controls what we do. So if we have the skills to talk to ourselves, to self-soothe and self-regulate, our language can do that. Okay? So then Dr. Russell Barkley took this Vygotskian model of language acquisition from public to private, and he found a way to connect it to executive functions, and it's really brilliant and fascinating. So one thing that he thought of is when individuals are talking to themselves, when they are engaged in internal self-talk, it is impossible to talk to yourself and talk to others at the exact same time. So you can have completely, nobody can tell that you're talking to yourself. You can have a totally privatized internal conversation between yourself and your brain, and you cannot talk to another person at the same time, because all verbal thinking, which is an executive function skill, self-talk, is speech to the self, but the face and larynx is suppressed. But it's not entirely, because we now know from studies that we can use little electrodes on the face and we can capture little movements, little firings, to show that even when you're talking to yourself, your mouth is moving and your larynx is moving in the tiniest little bit. It's the same brain system. Self-talk and external speech are the same system. It's fascinating. So when young kids are gaining language and gaining language acquisition, they're also gaining the skill of internal language. and it's the same brain system. So as one area strengthens, the other area strengthens as well. And for visual imagery, we also have learned this recently. In terms of visual imagery being used for sports performance, we can work with an athlete and have them imagine themselves throwing a ball as far as they can. And if we have electrodes attached to their arm, we're able to measure muscle movements in their arm, even though they didn't move their arm at all, because they visualized it. So visual imagery is used to improve sports performance. It's the same system. So that nonverbal system of visual imagery and the verbal system of internal language self-talk are the foundation of executive functions, because language controls self-regulation, and what we say becomes what we do. Okay? So Dr. Russell Barkley, he found that Vygotsky found that language goes from public to private, but Dr. Russell Barkley found that it's the same exact thing with executive functions. Executive functions, just like language, go from others back to the self. So it all starts with one of the first executive function skills to develop of inhibition, the ability to shut down the motor system, the ability to stop, the ability to pause, which is what I talked about in an earlier slide with the brain scans, and how we are able to pause and call on our working memory to make a decision that affects us in the distant future. So the inhibition is turning back to the self. How can we stop ourselves to make a better, healthier, positive choice? So after we use inhibition and shut down the motor system, we then call on something called our nonverbal working memory, or our visual imagery system. And we are able to stop what we are doing and hold images in our mind from the relevant past. And these images control our behavior in the moment and help us to make better decisions. So these images from past experiences help us to make better decisions. So the visual imagery system of language, and then we pair nonverbal working memory, the visual imagery system, with the verbal working memory system, which is self-talk and internal language. So we pair together our pictures with our self-talk, and that helps us to make better decisions. So the self-talk system and the visual imagery system, going from public to private, it moves in conjunction with language acquisition. Okay, so nonverbal working memory, like I said, which is the visual imagery system, along with inhibition, we stop, we re-image the relevant past. And then we call on our verbal working memory system, which is the internalized and private speech, that speech that used to be external, but we moved it internal. And this is what we refer to as our brain coach. And this is the words and the slogans I use with a lot of my clients to, talk to your brain coach, have that conversation with your brain coach before you react or before you make a decision. And then what's fascinating is that it gets even more complex from there. Just like language acquisition gets more complex, and we are able to add more language, add more vocabulary, have deeper conversations, so does executive functions. And we're able to take emotions that as young children are all external, we externalize our emotions and we react to the world around us, and we're able to eventually internalize our emotions and internalize our motivation, and we're able to create our own emotional state, and we're able to create our own motivational levels, our motivational degrees, another aspect of executive functioning that goes from external to internal. And one of the most important things here is internalizing play. So this is why preschool, kindergarten are so play-based. And this is why children's play is so important, because it lays the foundation for external play during the kindergarten preschool years to internal play. So this is another thing that goes from external to internal. And when play is internalized, this is the foundation for planning, problem solving, and mental flexibility. How can we take a problem? How can we take an image and manipulate it in our mind to come up with various scenarios that can, and various solutions that we can try? Trial and error thinking, cause and effect thinking. We are playing and manipulating information in our mind. What used to be hands-on and manual goes from public to private. And then between the ages of 5 to 7, like we said, language captures the motor system. What you say becomes what you do. So much of language and so much of executive functioning is public, and all of the goals is to become privatized. And this is that independent learning and independent skills. Executive functions really are independent skills. So as these skills go from public to private and kids are able to do them themselves internally, they're not as prompt dependent. Okay, and it all comes from internal language. Okay, so we now know that that language is the foundation of executive functions. Visual imagery, also known as the mind's eye, is the nonverbal system. Internal language, the mind's voice, is a verbal language. So we now know from a lot of this research that executive dysfunction is due to a disorganized or disconnected internal language system, an inability to stop, call on your visual imagery system, call on your verbal language, your internal language system, and use those to help you make better decisions in the moment with gratification that is delayed. So when we have organized internal language, we are able to build this if-then cause and effect thinking, which builds the skill of self-regulation. We're able to build the ability to plan for the future, which builds self-motivation, the ability to see yourself in the future accomplishing a goal and feeling great about it. Metacognition, the ability to self-evaluate, the ability to call on your non-verbal working memory and evaluate yourself. And then perspective-taking skills, the ability to use your internal language to think about others' thinking. How does this person feel about how I'm behaving? How does this person feel about the language I'm using? Which is crucial to social relationships. So really what we want to see here is individuals shift from external to mental. So with external, they're concerned with events around them. Events control them. Their environments control them. And then we want them to switch to mental, where they're controlled by their thoughts. They're thinking about their thoughts. Their thoughts are positive, motivating, engaging, self-stated intentions. We want kids to stop relying on others to start relying on themselves. We want, in the beginning, kids are very prompt dependent, and we want them to be independent. We want them to get to the point where they don't need someone to tell them to wake up in the morning. They don't need someone to knock on their door 10 times. They're getting up all by themselves. We want kids to go from being focused on the temporal now, the moment now. So many of these kids with ADHD and executive dysfunction are so focused on the now. Sarah Ward says it as these kids are now versus not now. They're stuck in the now. And we want these kids to start thinking about the anticipated future. The average adult is able to plan ahead 8 to 12 weeks. And that is crucial for your success and for running a family or running your career and all of the adult responsibilities. And we want that in our children. We want them to gain those skills, to be able to plan ahead into the distant future. And what's even more important is the shift from immediate gratification, what can I do right now that's gonna make me happy, which is most of the time is gaming, technology, to how can I delay gratification? How can I do my homework now and play later? How can I prep for college now and do more exciting things later? So we're seeing how things are going from public to private, external to internal. And this is both language and executive functions. So the period of language acquisition over the years of adolescence moves in conjunction with executive function acquisition. So right there, a fundamental connection between language and executive functions. Okay, and today what I really want to focus on is the special executive function skill of resilience. How can we switch the focus of ADHD to just organization, focus, hyperactivity, inattention, and how can we shift the focus to finally start thinking about language, internal language, and how we can build resiliency? How can we teach this child to be able to deal with the inevitable negatives? How can we teach them to be resilient enough to get through a non-preferred task? How can we give them the independent skills they need? So there's two special executive function skills: metacognition, which I touched on already, which is basically the skill of self-evaluation. But I'm really focused on resilience today, which I refer to as the ability to bounce back, the ability to bounce back from adversity, misfortune, or change. And a lot of us look at resiliency as this incredibly powerful word, being able to bounce back from a super negative event. But for some of our kids, we're looking for the ability of, enough resilience to finish their math homework, to finish a writing assignment, to finish a chore, to finish emptying the dishwasher. Do they have enough resilience to get through non-preferred tasks? And how can we build those skills? So we know with executive function skills and resiliency, these executive function skills are crucial to childhood development. They help children make healthy and positive choices. And because of all these fascinating studies done by the Harvard Center of the Developing Child and so many more, there's no better time than now to build these skills, okay? And how do we build executive function skills and resiliency? We now know that one of the most effective ways is through meaningful experiences and positive relationships. The way that a lot of these kids, I'm going to get into it, tend to have very, very small comfort zones. They tend to have a fixed mindset, and they tend to get stuck in their own little bubble of things that they enjoy. And it's very hard for them to have varied, meaningful experiences and more positive relationships. So what can we do to expand their experiences and relationships? Okay. So social relationships. We know that children's social play of all ages is an important practice for the development of executive function skills. And this is because during those early ages, it's kids visually learning from their parents, from adults, from teachers at school, and watching their peers. They learn by practicing these skills that were scaffolded for them. Play and social relationships is crucial to executive function development. And we're seeing this now with a lot of schools, mostly schools down south, that are decreasing and eliminating recess time. And what we see now over the years is these kids are becoming more and more dysregulated, and it's harder for them to sit in their chair and focus. And especially now in the era of virtual learning, it is crucial for these kids to be able to get up and move and play in between classes. At school, these kids have time in the hallways, time before class starts, and there's that social aspect to school when they're there in person with their peers. And when they're home doing virtual learning, that social aspect is gone, and you're not transitioning from one room to the other, from class to class. So it's so crucial to get that movement, to get them playing, to get them thinking. And because for virtual learning, they're usually sitting in front of a screen the whole day. So what can we do to get them moving and building relationships and playing? Okay. And here's another fascinating aspect is back to the brain study. Some researchers have hypothesized that the complexity of human social relationships, rather than the need to do higher math, is why the human prefrontal cortex is so large and our executive function abilities are so advanced. So the prefrontal cortex is large, executive functions are advanced, and this is it. The prefrontal cortex is a social organ. It's there for us to be able to deal with our self, actions to the self, so we can better perform in a social environment. Okay, and just a quick rundown of really what we're dealing with today. Today's youth, they live in a world full of distractions, full of avoidance. This is a great quote from Malcolm Gladwell. We value natural, effortless accomplishment over achievement through effort. Kids these days, they don't really care about what's happening behind the scenes. They want fun and they want results and they want it now. Kids these days have the high-speed internet, Google, GPS, next day delivery, video games, instant gratification. And they're experiencing this so often now, part of their daily lives, that they're having trouble with long-term goals in which there is delayed gratification. Why study ahead of time for a test when I could study the night before? It's hard for them to see the connection, to understand this delayed gratification. And it's very hard for kids to fail first at things. It's very hard for them to see the point that it's important to fail. It's important to make mistakes so you can have that growth mindset and gain these skills over time. And another thing is boredom. How can these kids deal with boredom? A lot of them have difficulty being bored. A lot of them have difficulty, they want constant, instant gratification. They don't want to go walk around the store with mom or dad. They want to have their phone. They want to have a game. They want to be doing something exciting all the time. How can we teach these kids to self-regulate during boredom? Okay. And this is more examples of the teens and the fixed mindset. Really what they're doing is, this instant gratification has caused kids to fear challenge, devalue effort. Effort and challenge are a threat. They threaten to unmask your flaws. If I try something new, I'm going to be bad at it because I've never done it before. And I don't want to be bad at something. I don't want to try this new math problem. I don't want to try this new sport. I don't want to join that new club because I'm not going to be good and I need to be good at something right away. Okay, and this is what shows that lack of resiliency. Okay, so here's a great post. This was just posted yesterday by Ryan Wexelblatt, the ADHD dude. One of my favorite quotes for ADHD of all time. This is a great quote. Flexibility is cultivated, inflexibility is accommodated. And this is so important for parents to remember. Kids with ADHD often say no to a new or unfamiliar thing because they fear they won't be good at it. And also, it takes them away from their small comfort zone. Why try something new when I can do the one or two things that I'm already good at? And it is so crucial to help your child develop EF skills and resiliency. Do not allow them to avoid new experiences. We need them having varied experiences. Ask yourself right now, what does your child do on a daily basis besides school and video games? Are they going out? Are they riding bikes? Are they doing new things? Are they trying out new shows? Are they trying new sports? Are they exercising? Are they reaching out to new peers? How are they at trying new things? And how prompt dependent are they on you? How much are you acting as their frontal lobe because they have not yet had enough varied experiences? Okay, and this is just a quick image I use I use this really one-on-one with a lot of my students. Is I like to show them a picture of the comfort zone and what the comfort zone means. In that small comfort zone, which is most likely video games or a couple of toys here and there, one or two friends, whatever it may be, what can we do to get you from the comfort zone to the growth zone? How can we get you trying new things? Because we now know that executive functions are built from varied experiences and positive relationships. So we need to get these kids out of the comfort zone and into the growth zone. Because once they're in that growth zone, they want to try new things. They feel low threat and high challenge. They embrace a challenge. They are emotionally engaged. And here's a great picture of that. If you want to screenshot that, I can share it later. I use this image with all of my students. It's very, very beneficial for them. Okay, just keeping an eye on time so we can have some questions there. So I'll try to speed up a little bit. Interpersonal relationships and varied experiences. We know that children's relationships play an important role in the development of executive functions. So it's really those adult-child relationships, both within and outside the home, that guide these children from being completely dependent to being able to execute executive skills for themselves. It makes them less and less prompt dependent. These adult-child relationships are crucial to decrease prompt dependence. And that's important because these adult-child relationships, not just mom, dad, son, daughter, but also therapists, speech pathologists, teachers, counselors, mentors, they provide scaffolding and they help these kids practice new experiences and emerging skills before they're expected to perform on their own. How often are you as a parent pushing your kids into new activities? How much are you allowing them to practice emerging skills so they can be less prompt dependent? Or are your kids sticking to their comfort zone and doing those one or two same things every single day? We need to have an adult-child relationship where we're constantly scaffolding, we're constantly challenging, we're constantly holding them accountable. Okay? So children who routinely experience social interactions that provide these kind of opportunities are more capable at doing all of these things. Resisting distractions, controlling their behavior and emotions, complying with adult requests and rules, engaging in goal-directed behavior. And that's because they are routinely experiencing social interactions and varied experiences. They are not isolating one-on-one in video games, and no, playing online games like Fortnite is not a social experience. They're being pushed into varied experiences. They're being pushed into social relationships. And we now know from research that these kids are more capable at these skills. And experts also believe that a more ordered and predictable environments foster the development of these executive skills. And there's that term that so many people are scared to talk about, it still has sort of a stigma to it, is authoritative parenting. Many people misinterpret authoritative parenting as parents that have strict rules or lots of yelling and strict consequences. That's really not it. Authoritative parenting is just having structure in your home. It does not make sense for a young child with executive dysfunction to have open access to games and be able to play whenever they want. There has got to be structure around gaming time, especially during home virtual school. And there has to be known consequences, known rewards, known standards, known rules. It's just creating structure. That's authoritative parenting, is making sure your child has enough social experiences and varied experiences. Okay, and when we have these interpersonal relationships with our child, it is so important to focus on these four things. So if you find a speech pathologist, if you find any clinician to work with your child, it is so important that they focus on these four things. Every good clinician that knows about ADHD and executive dysfunction focuses to make sure the child is interested, the child is motivated towards the therapy. I hear all the time from the parents I work with is, oh, my kid never complains to get on sessions with you. He's more than happy to hop on these Zoom calls. He likes seeing you at school. He likes coming to your clinic, because that's what's so important. You have got to tap into their internal, intrinsic motivation. And these kids always have to be comfortable and they always have to feel safe. And when you focus on these four things, that's when you lay the foundation for learning and gaining independent skills. Okay, and just some more things to think about. This is more strategies at home, things I think about. Really just in order to get your child who is rigid, who does have a fixed mindset, who likes to stay in their comfort zone, we need to teach them habituation. We need to teach them it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to fail first, okay? Exposure therapy, build skills through experience. Okay, you've never tried this before. Okay, this is something that makes you uncomfortable. This is something you're not necessarily good at, but we're gonna keep at it. And I'm gonna be there, right there for you if you need help. I'm gonna keep you safe. I'm gonna keep you engaged. I'm gonna keep you motivated. And I'm gonna make sure you stick with that math homework. I'm gonna make sure you stick with that exercise routine. I'm gonna make sure you stick with riding your bike 3 to 5 times a week. And you get out of the house and you get that exercise. I'm gonna make sure that you join the fitness club, you join the poetry club. I'm going to hold you accountable to doing these new things where initially, impulsively, you said, there's no way I'm doing that. We need to hold these kids accountable and give them that exposure therapy, because 9 times out of 10, you will be so glad you did it. Because as the weeks go by and they start to gain competence, they start to gain confidence. And you're going to see your child doing things and enjoying things they never did before. Okay? So what we need to do at home, what parents can do, what the parent coaching I always do, we need to encourage children to be brave, face their fears, tolerate discomfort. And we do this gradually by guiding them to face their anxieties and not giving up. And the best way to face their anxieties is we build that internal language system. How can we teach kids to use their nonverbal working memory, the visual imagery system, to visualize themselves in the future, completing the non-preferred task first? So whatever it is that's giving them anxiety, how can we teach them to use their visual imagery system, which human beings have the strongest visual imagery system of any species on this planet? How can we teach them to use this system to visualize themselves being successful and to pre-live it, to pre-experience it in their minds with many different possibilities and many different outcomes? So when it finally does happen, they're ready for it because they already pre-experienced it. Positivity and gains in executive functions decrease anxieties. And we teach these kids to use their mental time travel skills to see themselves in a different space and time from where they are now being successful. So for parents, it's so important to stay strong in the short term, because of course there's going to be behaviors, there's going to be, there could be behaviors, there could be fighting, there could be whatever it may be when you're first introducing the structure, when you're first pushing them into non-preferred tasks, but it always brings long-term success. It strengthens that frontal lobe, it decreases anxiety, it increases independent skills, and failure and discomfort in the beginning creates skills, strength, success, and of course, resiliency, all from building internal language skills. Okay? And one of the most important things for parents, this is one of the simplest things, is you always want to praise effort and do not praise ability. You don't want to feed into that fixed mindset of I'm smart, I'm dumb, I'm good, I'm bad, this is easy, this is hard. You want to teach these kids that not everything is so fixed. Things are more flexible. Teach them flexible thinking. If they praise how much they studied, praise how hard they worked, praise how long they stuck with it. Focus more on their effort. Don't praise their ability. If they get an A on a test, say, yeah, congratulations. I saw you really worked hard when you were studying this past week. It's not about ability, it's about effort. Have the kid focus on the journey, not the final points. Okay, so overall, what we're always focused on is improving quality of life and improving a child's self-worth. So when we focus on language, social skills, executive functions, building that resiliency, decreased anxiety, always starting with internal language skills, what we're doing is we are improving overall quality of life and overall self-worth. Because really that's the goal of any speech pathologist, any executive function specialist, any ADHD specialist. We're always looking to improve overall quality of life and teaching kids to gain resiliency and the growth mindset. Okay, so here's my information here. You guys can find me at grownowtherapy.com. You can search Grow Now Therapy on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. I have a YouTube page where I post some great videos and tutorials. I'm always posting great things on my Instagram. You guys can check that out. That's my number there if you'd like to follow up with some questions, if you have some comments. If you're not able to get your question in today, please call, text, email. My email is right there. Reach out to me anytime. I love hearing from you guys, especially the families that reach out and participate in these webinars and take the time out of your day to do a webinar. So please reach out, ask me any questions. If you have a specific question about your child, I would love to hear about it. Here's the address to the Grow Now Therapy Center. I partner with many public and private schools in the area. And I'd be happy to get to know you and answer any questions. So now, okay. All right.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, Mike. That was amazing, as always.
Thank you.
I know we will stay on for a couple of extra questions. If I will keep this recording as well. So if you are going into another meeting at 11 o'clock, feel free to jump off. That's okay. I will send out this recording to everybody that has attended. Feel free to share it. And when I send out this recording, I will also put in Mike's information in there so that you can reach out to him as well. So now I feel like we can open it up to questions, and feel free to raise your hand. And Mike, if you want to call on people.
Sure. Yeah. Anyone can begin. If you have a specific question, I'd be happy to answer. A lot of people are on mute. Okay. Getting lots of comments. Appreciate it. Okay. So thank you. Thank you all for the very, very nice comments in the chat. I appreciate that from some great people that I know. I'm so happy that some of my families were able to attend. If anyone has any questions, you can type it in the chat. How about we do that? How about we type questions in the chat? Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate that.
Looks like you've answered a lot of questions.
Okay, so here we go. How do we change internal language self-talk? Excellent question. Thank you so much for that. So this is always a process. As I talked about in the beginning of the presentation, a lot of these kids with executive dysfunction, ADHD, they have such difficulty re-imaging the relevant past using their nonverbal working memory and helping themselves to make healthy and positive choices in the moment. It's very, very difficult for them to take the lessons they've learned and apply it to the moment. So what that tends to lead to is a lot of negative redirections. A lot of these kids tend to get in trouble at school, and there's lots of fights at home, and home becomes a toxic environment. So the most important thing with internal self-talk is it has got to be positive, motivating, and engaging. It has to be the child talking to themselves and being positive and coaching themselves. We call it the brain coach for a reason. We need to help these kids to motivate themselves. So many of the students who come to me also have speech and language needs. So one of the first things you have to do is focus on that area of speech and language development. It could be literacy, it could be expressive language, it could be receptive language. You have to focus on the language first. So first we have to build the language skills, and then we teach them various strategies to first visualize. The nonverbal working memory comes first. So we practice mental movies. We talk about the DVD player in the mind for them to be able to think about previous things. And then we begin to apply the language and how you can coach themselves. And one of the things that you guys can do at home, that parents can do at home, one of the most simple and effective strategies is start externalizing your self-talk. For instance, if you're in the kitchen, say out loud, oh, I think I'm gonna wash the dishes now so I have more free time later. And after I wash the dishes, maybe I'll sit and watch TV. So all of the internal language that you're using at home around your kids that is internalized and privatized, make it public so you can model for your child. That's one of the most effective ways. It's so simple. It takes some practice because you're subconsciously doing it all day. Us adults that do not have executive function difficulties, or some of us, I know I have some difficulties sometimes, but we wake up in the morning and we're instantly planning our day before our day even starts. As soon as I wake up, I think I have to do this, this, this before I can start doing this. And I'm just doing that instantly. But these kids aren't doing that. They're in the moment, they're impulsive. So how can we model self-talk to our children? All right, here we go. As a parent, I see there are things we need to change as well. Do you coach parents as well? Of course. All executive function therapy is coaching parents. It's never just the student. You always have to, one of the biggest things that you want to do with parents is help them build structure in the home. Sometimes it's so hard for them to build structure around screen time, around video game time. And I developed an EF tech manual I'd be happy to share with you guys for attending today. That's one of the most important things, is to have structure in the home. And then from there, doing things like I said at the end, praising effort and externalizing your self-talk and being more flexible with your child and having your child express themselves in various ways, validating their feelings and being flexible with them. All executive function coaches should be parent coaches as well. So that's a definite. So here we have another. Therapy for anxious children often teaches to be in the moment and not focus on the future. How does that relate or translate to your growth diagram? Okay, so when they're in the moment, yes, they should be focused on the moment. So anxiety tends, so say for example, you have a child who's anxious to go to the library, just a general example. When they're there at the library, yes, they should be focused in the moment, and they should be focused on being in the library and being comfortable, and teach them to recognize the environment around them and those sorts of things. So that's very important. But before you go into the library, it's so important to do something called front loading, where you are preparing the student before they go into the library. So, okay, when you go into the library, there could be other kids. Everybody might be really, really quiet, because that's what you do in the library. You have to be quiet. You're going to see lots of books. You might see lots of adults you don't know. You might have to sit on a carpet with a bunch of other kids and listen to the teacher. You want to, give them as much information as you can before they go, to mentally prepare them. And you want to teach them to eventually be independent, where they visualize themselves going without your front loading, and they visualize themselves in the future. This is all before going to the library. They visualize themselves going, they visualize themselves being successful. They're able to apply positive visual imagery, positive self-talk. So once they actually are there in the library, they're in the moment. They're not concerned about the future. They're not concerned about what may happen. They're just there in the moment. So before the event happens, you want to do some future thinking skills. And then once you're there, you want them to be nice and in the moment. Okay? I'm trying to imagine how to fit these skills into my Wilson reading system instruction. I am very familiar with Wilson reading. I do a ton of work with literacy as an SLP. So of course, as a speech pathologist, I do a lot of work with literacy and speech and intelligibility and all those things I talked about in the beginning. So yes, the vast majority of students with ADHD and executive dysfunction will have issues with reading and writing. And that is such a common thing, because writing and reading comprehension is such a major task on the frontal lobe. It requires so much internal language organization, and then you have to take the time to transfer from your brain onto paper. And it's a lot. And a lot of these kids don't visualize the story first. They don't visualize it first. They don't apply the language. Writing is a process. There's planning, there's editing, there's graphic organizers, but a lot of these kids want that instant gratification. They want the story done now. They don't want to plan. They don't want to go through the process. They want to just create a writing now. So really, depending on the child, depending on the age, I'm very familiar with Wilson. It's a fantastic presentation. It's a fantastic system and system of instruction, and it's tied very closely to executive functions. Let's see. Thank you for a terrific presentation. Thank you. You've given a background structure to so many different skills we have taught. I'm an SLP. Awesome. Nice. So we had another SLP here, and we also had my other friend Shaya here, who is a great friend of mine. A fellow SLP here. I'm always happy to see you guys. And I've always encouraged parents to model self-talk. I've also found visualization powerful to